So in our gospel story today, you see the story of the man born blind. And in the longer version, it goes into a lot more detail. Jesus at one point in the complete gospel says, "As long as I am the world, I am the light of the world." And when he had said this, he spat on the ground, and then he made the mud, spread it on the man's eyes, and told him to go and wash in this pool. And when he did wash, he came back, and he was able to see. He went, as I mentioned before, from darkness into light. Now, one of the interesting things about this story is this remarkable change is actually a metaphor in a way, because the people around him, they can't accept who he is. They can't accept that this one who was born blind, who they had judged to be unworthy, is now full with sight. But I was very taken by Paul's writing to the Ephesians today. And he says quite clearly, "For once you were in darkness, but now in the Lord you are light." You are light. Walk always as children of the light. It's one of my favorite parts of the baptism ceremony. When you give the candle and you say, "Receive the light of Christ," to the godparents who receive it on behalf of the child, you say, "May they always be children of the light." So, I want to tell you a story. Now, this is a true story because it happened to me. Now, in my 20 years as a deacon, I got about a handful of stories that really impacted me, perhaps changed me in ways that I still think about. And I know I've probably told you this story before, but it just struck me that it might work well today. I was just sitting at home minding my own business on a Sunday, and I got a phone call. And it was a phone call from a local funeral director, a young woman, perhaps one of the most professional funeral directors I ever worked with. She was lovely, professional, caring, and she called me, which was not normal. And she said to me, "Deacon Mike, I have a problem." And I said, "Oh, okay, what is it?" And she said, "There is a very young couple here, and they're having a service, not a service, they're here this morning with their family. There's only about 8 of them. And they had said originally they didn't want any prayers or anything to do with religion. They just wanted to be on their own. But now they have just come to me, and they said, could we find somebody to come and say some prayers with us?" So she said, and I could hear it in her voice, she was almost desperate. She said, "Could you come?" And I said, "Sure, I will come." I had the time. So I got in the car and I drove. I didn't really know anything about what was going on. And I arrived at the funeral home. It's Chapel Hill on Woodbine there. Come in. The young woman comes up to me. And again, I tell you, she's a funeral director, right? Very professional. And she has tears in her eyes. You never see this with funeral directors, okay? This is not what they do. And she was just lost. She didn't know what to do for these people. I said, "Well, what's the situation?" She said, "Well, it's a young couple. And they just had stillborn twins. And they're in there with about 5 or 6 family members. And they're lost. They don't know what to do, and they want some prayers. Do you think you could do that?" So I said, "Okay." I was not prepared for this, all right? There's nothing you can go through in your training or whatever to take you into this particular situations. So is there any way that I could bring them any kind of hope into this moment of unbelievable sorrow? So I walked in, and they were young. They were younger than my own kids, right? And they were standing there just blank, and nobody said anything. It was quiet. And it was almost like when I came in, they were glad to see somebody else, if you know what I mean. And the father of the young man came over, shook my hand, and said what had happened. And I don't know if you've ever been to a service for stillborns, but the coffins are so unbelievably small. And they're both just on this table. And so we gathered. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? Now, I will tell you, in 20 years, I have learned what not to say. All right? Now, I'm going to give you a little piece of advice here. If you are ever called, as I asked you to reflect on, to bring light into the darkness in an unbelievable moment of sadness and tragedy, never say these words. God never sends you more than you can handle. It's one of the worst things you can say. What image of God do you have? That, oh, okay, there's Mike. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send him so much just to take him to the edge, right? But I won't push him off. You see, the world often sends us way more than we can handle. Never say to someone who's lost a child, God needed some more angels. God doesn't need any more angels. It's not the way God works, right? And one priest that I worked with, his sister had a terrible accident, left a quadriplegic, said that one person actually came to him and said, God must be punishing your sister. No. You see, our image of God is not one who sends pain and suffering, but is one who sends people to be with you and to help you during these moments. And so I thought I would just tell them our story. Do you know our story? So I got up there and said, this is our story. I have no idea if these are religious people, if they're Christian, Catholics, whatever. And they gave no indication. I'm just going to tell you something. Let's just tell you our story. Our story is of a God that so loved the world that he sent his only son. Our story is that Jesus was cared for by loving parents, Joseph and Mary. It was not a life that they had that was easy in any stretch of the way, and it was not without sacrifice and suffering. But they had love. Love for each other and the love of God at the very center of their relationships. Joseph, of course, passed away. And these last four mysteries or sorrows of Mary, she walks alone, but Mary walked with Jesus through all of these things, through his passion, his death, and his burial. And Jesus' death on the cross was not the end of the story. And then I shared with them what little I knew about their story. I said, these children of yours, who are right here, were loved their entire lives. This is one of the great blessings of being Catholic, to believe that life begins at conception, that these children were fully formed human beings with a soul, and they were loved completely from the moment of that conception by these parents. And yes, fathers, I know we have a big role, but for the mothers, especially at this moment, there's an unbelievable connection as they nourished these two children and sacrificed for them, because being pregnant with twins cannot be easy. And the father cared for them and their mother. So why did this happen? Well, that's 15 years later, and I still have no idea. I have no idea. And I didn't try and offer any kind of explanation other than to say, I have come to understand that that is what this sixth sorrow of Mary, holding her lifeless child in her arms, could be all about. This sorrow that is unbelievable, that Mary really was always with Jesus through this whole thing, and now at this moment. So all I could offer them was a belief that their precious children's story was not in any way ended, and that they were now being cared for by a loving and merciful God. Now, some of you might say now they weren't baptized. By the way, be very careful if you thought that you're not the Pharisees in the gospel, okay? Because in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we actually believe in the mercy of God and that God will take care of these children. Go read that right in the Catechism. So what is the sixth sorrow of Mary, the Pieta? What does it show us? I believe it shows us Mary being the light in the darkness. We share with her maternal grief, her compassion, and her sacrifice, but most importantly, as this story will play out, her hope in the midst of sorrow. That despite her heartbreak, this Pieta reflects a quiet trust in God, pointing towards the resurrection. This Father Leonard, who I work with on this series, actually be on the Lenten retreat online this week. One of his talks we titled, Easter Sunday is God's answer to Good Friday. It's a beautiful message. And so trusting in God during times of great sorrow and darkness is what allows us to move forward, no matter how difficult or painful the journey may be. It is that trust which helps us to go in peace and to glorify the Lord by being a person who brings Christ's light